about this access cult idea. Is that what you mean? That like people are
access cult?
Cult.
Yeah, essentially. So, what I saw happening was that the MSS and also Chinese military intelligence agencies were brokering access between a lot of foreigners and Chinese Communist Party officials. If you go to Beijing, you don't have Xi Jinping's number. You need a contact who can set up that meeting, who can vouch for you, who can use their political capital to convince party leaders that you're worth meeting, that you're essentially a worthwhile target for influence and engagement. And so, for example, you can find, one of the really helpful things about these MSS operations is that they were covert rather than clandestine. So what that means is that you had MSS officers going undercover as think tank scholars, but really living that identity as a think tank scholar and just behaving as publicly as a think tank scholar normally might. And that means there's a lot of public records about some of the things that they were involved in. So I identified one guy as an MSS officer, and then I saw that he was talked about in the memoirs of this American activist who'd gone to Beijing and wanted to help China and Taiwan resolve their differences independently. As an individual, he wanted to kind of sit between this international dispute. And so he went to Beijing. These MSS officers were organizing all of his meetings, and then they offered him a deal. They said, we will get you a meeting personally with Jiang Zemin himself, and you can pass on your advice and your letter about how to resolve tensions with Taiwan to Jiang Zemin in person if you take our side on Taiwan. So I think he didn't take that deal, but it makes it so clear that this is something the MSS really sees as a tool of influence, the ability to offer access to the inner sanctum of the Chinese Communist Party.
That really makes me think of Elon Musk and how he had the recent thing about, Taiwan should become a special administrative region of China. It's like, who in China was giving him, who is he talking to in China? Who's giving him access? Like, I wonder if this is a case where maybe that idea was planted for him. I don't know. But
I mean, he could also just be not kind of naive on foreign policy all by himself.
That's true. That's true. But I mean, there's at least the system there. And what I find interesting is this is so different from, I think, what a lot of people think of as spycraft. It's not like stealing documents or playing baccarat and drinking martinis.
Yes, that's what spies do. They play baccarat.
Yeah.
Which means there are lots of spies in China because they all go play baccarat in Macau.
Yes, there you go. Wow, Shelley, you really understand China.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Shelley, your ideas are so great.
I'm not going to like this, am I? It's just going to keep going.
It's a way to undermine praising you.
Well, so one of the people that you talk about in your book is you almost have like a whole chapter dedicated to the former Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Can you talk a bit about how he ended up kind of doing the MSS's work without being an agent or anything?
Yeah, he's a really great case study in how these elite influence operations work and also how far back they go. So this was the same Australian Prime Minister who thought of himself as best friends with Zhao Ziyang and Hu Yaobang, these two sort of liberal reformist leaders of the Chinese Communist Party in the 80s, and then was shocked by the Tiananmen massacre in 89, cried in a televised speech when he talked about the massacre shortly afterwards, and then left politics and then was trying to set himself up as a businessman in the 1990s, sort of a typical career pathway for retired politicians. And all of a sudden he gets an offer from the Chinese government inviting him back to visit. And he was really surprised by this. He thought he'd burnt his relationship with the Chinese government by speaking out about the Tiananmen massacre and welcoming tens of thousands of Chinese students to settle in Australia in its aftermath. But he took up this offer. Didn't really know what they had planned for him. And he went to Beijing. He managed to set up a company in China, which basically sort of marketed access to Chinese elites to foreign companies. So a foreign company would go to Beijing. They wanted to get meetings with, the top economic official and they would go to his consulting company to be able to set up that meeting. But what he never said publicly was that the group that invited him to China was this center for this China Institute for Strategy and Management. And this China Institute for Strategy and Management included as its vice president the same undercover MSS vice minister who was running the Soros case. It included the chairman of a front company for the MSS 12th Bureau, which specializes in elite influence operations. And its secretary general was the son of that guy, who himself was a member of an MSS 12th Bureau organization. And it's the son, the secretary general of this institute that invited Hawke over, that actually set up a joint venture, this consulting company with Bob Hawke. So Bob Hawke's consulting company of offering access to foreign companies was actually set up with this MSS asset, essentially. And through none of this relationship would he have, I don't think he would actually have been pitched by the MSS. They wouldn't have gone up to him and been like, here, I'll give you $1 million to work for the MSS. They don't need to do that when they're running these activities, building influence over you, having a relationship with you through business. So it's a really nice way to engage with and influence foreign elites.
So what were some of the things that Bob Hawke did?
I think Bob Hawke really, was really a kind of a key voice in Australian China policy. Here's this guy who had really shown his credentials as someone who loved the Chinese people through what he did at the Tiananmen massacre. And then he went back to China and he said, China's open for business now. We should be happy to go back and engage with them. He mentored a lot of key people within the Australian Labor Party. He's probably seen as the most popular former Australian Prime Minister. He was one of the founders of the Boao Forum for Asia, which is really the kind of influence forum for China to engage with foreign elites. So I think his main contribution was just lending his name to China, coming out overseas and presenting China as a place that had moved beyond the Tiananmen massacre. This guy who cried when the Tiananmen massacre unfolded, coming out and saying, let's move beyond that and let's engage.
So this is really just the MSS was using him not to change his mind, but rather to amplify his emerging view that China was going to liberalize, and they just kind of did things that would encourage him to push what was ultimately his own message.
Yeah, I think he genuinely wanted to be friends with China. He that's why he took this offer of a free trip to China in '93, and subsequently made over 100 trips back and forth to the country. And he felt that he was really being welcomed by the Chinese Communist Party as a friend. And the very fact that they were doing that, despite the Tiananmen massacre, told him that they were moving past that. When in reality, it never worked like that.
Yeah, it's a really clever tactic to take somebody who was openly critical and give them wrong information to draw false conclusions on their own. It's amazing to see how he went from being a China hawk to China's hawk.
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Thank you.
Another really interesting thing about this is that in the same year that Bob Hawke was invited back to China by this MSS front organization for a meeting with Jiang Zemin himself, Jiang Zemin was giving a secret speech to the Ministry of State Security where he talked a very different line. In this speech, he talks about how Western countries have never for a moment stopped trying to split us, trying to westernize us. They don't want to see us rise. And then we can't pursue economic development if it comes at the cost of the Chinese Communist Party's control over this territory that we've won out, that countless martyrs, in his words, have carved out for us. So this is just a totally different image, I think, to the kind of friendly, pro-Western face that Jiang Zemin was showing Bob Hawke and that he showed the rest of the world.
Which is interesting because in a lot of the commentary you see these days that sort of the longer telegram, the idea that the problem with the Chinese Communist Party is Xi Jinping. And these people, these China analysts who look back fondly at Jiang Zemin those days, Like they
Oh,
they aren't hearing
he
them.
gave so much access. I actually remember a AP article that from a couple of weeks ago that was talking about how, you know, a lot of reporters or, you know, analysts look back fondly on days with Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji because of, like, you know, Jiang would just talk about whatever, you know, off the cuff with reporters.
Totally off the cuff. And Jiang Zemin also spoke English, so he made an effort to, wasn't necessarily great English, but it seemed like he was making an effort to engage with the West, right?
So naive.
I think you know, there are real differences between like Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, but fundamentally, I think they're you know, far greater, the consistencies in the sort of shared belief in the sanctity of the Chinese Communist Party and its role. And also, I think they probably all shared this idea that that was fundamentally incompatible with the US's vision for the world and with this idea of, you know, liberal world order. China hasn't really hidden, I think, its intent to challenge that. You know, it's been quieter about it, but I think fundamentally, you know, you had Jiang Zemin talking about these issues in the 90s. And I think their mind was really set on this path after the Tiananmen massacre, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They saw that if they wanted to continue rising, if they wanted to continue developing, but keep Communist Party rule over China, then they had to run things differently, that they couldn't just integrate into a US-led world order. But, you know, obviously China just wasn't in a position to do that and come out publicly saying that in the 1990s. But Xi Jinping and Hu Jintao, to some extent, felt that the time has arrived.